could send it to Brittany.
I just put it on the cloud.
Okay.
We're recording. It says let's pause and stop recording. So I assume it's recording now.
Thank you. Thank you. By
All
next one, I'll have it down. So welcome, everyone. I just want to say that, first of all, I'm Sally Lipsky, if you don't know me, but I want to say it's a pleasure that here it is almost a year, that the last time that Phil did a gardening was last June, as I recall, Phil.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so helpful to me. I learned so much as an amateur gardener. And I asked him a few months ago, I said, it would be nice to have this information like in April, when we were really starting to think about gardens. And so he agreed, because Phil comes in, when we did person-to-person, in-person meetings, he came in with this bounty from his vast garden that was beautiful and so tasty when he shared we love surplus there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Phil Ciarelli, and everybody else, please remain mute. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. And just a reminder that tomorrow I will be emailing everybody with any information that's we didn't complete here or questions that came up, but also with a recording for you to rewatch and share and any. Okay, so take it away, Phil.
Okay, let me share my screen here. And okay. Can you see the agenda there, Sally? Hold on here. I think we got a technical glitch. Can you see it? Can you see it now, Sally?
Yes, I can see it now. Yes. So
okay.
If you want to just put the slideshow, start the slideshow. Okay. It's perfect.
All
okay.
Right. All right. So we're going to talk about gardening for beginners. And this is all part of our plant-based Pittsburgh Food for Health group. And I'm going to cover basics of gardening. Talk a little bit about myself and my experience, mention something about starting seeds and soil, fertilizer, till versus no-till, watering, weeds, pest controls, and then miscellaneous. And then we'll take your questions from the chat at the end of the presentation. I've been part of the plant-based lifestyle for the last 13 years, and I'm a member of the Pittsburgh East Group. Pittsburgh has the distinction of having several plant-based group departments. So spent a lot of time when I was young working with my parents in gardens, both with my mom in her flower beds and my dad in vegetable garden. I've been having my own gardens for quite a while. And I'm not really a garden expert. I'm just experienced with certain types of vegetables that I've grown and flowers that I've grown in the past. So I'm sure there are many of you that have some experiences, and if there are things you'd like to contribute or amplify at the end of the presentation, please include them in the chat, and we can discuss them and share whatever knowledge that you have. Oops. I find that there's a lot of benefits to gardening. And the biggest one that I see is high quality food. The kinds of vegetables and stuff that we get in the stores are usually grown for convenience of the farmer that's growing them rather than the taste buds of the consumer. If you get tomatoes from the store and compare them to a fresh picked tomato in your garden, there's a vast difference in the flavor profile. Those tomatoes in the stores are grown to have tough skins for harvesting and long shelf lives, and the taste is the last quality that they shoot for. Also, after being sedentary somewhat over the winter, I find that I get a lot of good exercise in gardening. I'm discovering muscles that I hadn't used for a long period of time. So it's good for that. And it gives me an opportunity to spend some quality time outside and just enjoy working with the plants. I also will take off my shirt or expose my skin for 15 or 20 minutes during the day to get some sunshine and create some vitamin D. If I'm going to be out all day, I typically wear long sleeves so I don't get too much. This is a photo from a while back of my garden. It's about almost a quarter of an acre. And the rows running in this direction are like 110 feet or so. And it's like about 60 feet in this direction here. And on the upper right here, like I have maybe a 30-foot asparagus bed, and I had some corn planted in here, and I plant a lot of potatoes, 35 or 45 pounds of seed potatoes. And then I have greens down here. I'll plant Swiss chard and kale, endive, a whole variety of different greens and beans. And then these are my tomatoes and peppers. We're down in this area down here. What a drab world it would be if we didn't have flowers. And I really enjoy growing flowers. This is a photo from an older photo that I had from a few years ago. And these are some of my flowers that I grew last year. I have some dahlias and asters and gladiolas, some roses, but I really enjoy the color and the varieties. I'm going to talk a little bit about the alternative types of gardens, and one is gardening in containers. I'm sure most of us do that, at least have a few flowers on our porch or whatever. And container gardening can be challenging, but you want to make sure that you've got good drainage in any kind of container that you plant. And you need to keep the fertility up depending upon what kind of soil that you're using. Usually the potting soils have some nutrients in them, and compost. You can use compost, which will give you some longer term fertility. But you want to make sure that you acclimate the plants, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, just to make sure that you don't put them out when it's too windy or too cold, and get them acclimated. And the biggest problem I see with container gardening is moisture. It's really hard to keep after them. It's easy to forget. And there's some things you can do. There are some materials you can add to retain moisture somewhat, and we'll talk about irrigation type techniques that could be used too. It's good for vegetables and flowers, and I know a lot of people would just, like for vegetables, have only grown like cherry tomatoes, small things like that. But you can grow potatoes and almost any vegetable. You can get get a fairly large tub. Or like if you want to grow potatoes, they have people have these fibrous bags you can get, and you fill them up with soil and compost, and you can grow some pretty good crops with them without taking up a whole lot of space. There's also raised beds, and they're good for smaller spaces. You can fill raised beds with soil and compost. What I would recommend would be putting in the bulk of the material would be soil, and then laying down a layer of cardboard for weed suppression, and then adding like 8 inches of compost on top of that as the planting media. The cardboard will decompose, and you can make a pretty nice bed like that. It's much easier on your back and knees for those of us with those types of issues. And they're easier to cover too if you want to do that. They warm up pretty quickly. And when you do put them in, you want to make sure you have drainage. You can, depending upon how you structure the raised bed, if you have a bottom on it. And I know some people that have had problems with moles and other types of digging animals have put like a layer of hardware cloth along the bottom of the raised bed in order to keep them from digging in and getting at the bulbs and tubers. You can make the bed 12 to 18 inches or deeper if you wish. They take a little more money to set up, but once you have it set up, then the investment goes way down, so it's not so much of an issue. And they're fairly easy to maintain and easy to get access to. So I want to talk a little bit about starting seeds. And the biggest advantages that I see in starting seeds are you just have so many more options for varieties. Your big box stores and garden centers will carry a set profile of seeds, and but if you want to get like more heirloom varieties and things that are a little bit out of the mainstream, you have the ability to order them online, and then by starting your own seeds, you can do that. And you can save a little bit of money. It's best to stagger your seeding based on germination and the last frost date. And so there's this app called From Seed to Spoon, and it's a pretty good app. And it will tell you based on your GPS setting on your phone. It takes the NOAA data and over the last 50 years or so, and gives you an average first frost and last frost date. And the app also has information on different insect pests and companion planting. It's right now it's free. They're going to be charging for it at some point in time. But what I did was just made a spreadsheet with the dates on it for the different varieties. Their catalog, the database that they're using, is basically a Burpee seed base. So it'll have the most common things that Burpee sells, but for some things you won't find, like I was looking for radicchio, which is an Italian chicory. They didn't have that in there, but it'll have most of the common seeds that the average gardener would be using. That you can save seeds from heirloom varieties. Some of the hybrids, it's difficult because they may not breed back to what you have. They may go to the seed stock. And so I ordered seeds from Baker Creek catalog this year, which sells heirloom varieties. And I got pretty good germination from from them, and I'm going to save some of the seeds from them for next year. When you start your seeds, you can start them under grow lights. You can use inexpensive shop type lights. I would not get the cheapest ones because the ballast, which provide the starting energy, are not as good. I would get the mid-range ones. Or you can use LEDs. LEDs are more expensive. But if you have some existing lighting, you can convert the shop lights to LEDs. They sell bulbs that are in the exact same dimensions. And you need to do a little rewiring for that, but it's pretty straightforward. I like to use these rope ratchet hangers for my light holders. And the nice thing about them is that you can lift up on the lights and pull down on the rope, and it will lock it in place when you let go, so you can get at the plants for watering or checking them out. You can also angle the fixture so that if you have some plants that are growing faster than others at one end of the container or the other, you can keep the bulb closer to the plants. The types of bulbs you can use, the recommendations that I've seen are 15 to 2,000 lumens, which is the energy, the light energy that's put out by the bulbs, and between 4 and 6,000 Kelvin is the temperature. Around 6,000, you get your very cool bulbs, and closer below 4,500, you get the warmer bulbs, the more yellow. This is the more in the infrared spectrum. It's more the red areas. So these give you optimum. I've used the fluorescent bulbs in the past, and this year I did buy a conversion from Home Depot and converted to LEDs, and I'm going to see if I'm getting faster growth from them, because each one of the bulbs I think was 1,800 lumens, and I have 2 of them in the fixture, so that's like 3,600 there. You should leave them on for about 16 hours a day, and 1 to 2 inches above the plants. I put mine on a timer. You can also use temperature controlled heating pads. These are good for peppers, especially because peppers are ones that are really tough to germinate. They do like a lot of heat. They'll be the last of my seeds that will germinate. Tomatoes, I've got tomato seeds that have already sprouted, but the peppers are real slow in coming. But this will help accelerate that. One of the things that I like to do is to wet the potting soil before planting, and I'll take and wet it down and put it in a container and let that soil, the potting soil, soak up the water. Try not to use too much water. You want to be able to squeeze a lump of that and just get a couple of drops out. You don't want it to be totally super saturated, because that's not good for the seeds. But you just want to make sure that it's well wetted. I like to put in 2 or 3 seeds per cell to make sure that I get something that germinates. And what you can do once these the seedlings start to sprout, you can divide them and repot them if you wish, and separate them. It's not hard to do, and they'll survive that. But you don't want to plant them too deep, and you don't want to overwater them, because that causes some damping off can occur, and you will lose some of your seedlings. I've watered using just a spritz mister to do that. And now what I'm doing is I fill a container, maybe a half or a third of the way full of water, and take the 6-pack out of the tray and put it in there for 15 minutes or so. And then put it back in, and let the water absorb up from the bottom, but through capillary action. And I find that much more convenient. But you also want to make sure that your containers all have adequate drainage, so the water is not trapped in there. It's good to harden seedings off before planting. What I usually do is prevent them from wind and sunburn, and it thickens the cuticles on the leaves, and you have less water loss and transplant shock. There's a lot of ways of doing this. 1 hour a day for 7 days, 3 days overcast days in a row all day, 3 to 4 hours a day, gradually increasing. But when you can approach it differently, but just make sure you get them out there and it's not too windy, and give them an opportunity to get exposed to those conditions. Maybe bring them back and forth until you feel that they're developing good strong stems, and the leaves aren't being overburnt. I'd like to show you a little bit about my setup. I have 8 6-packs per tray times 4 trays, or 192 cells that I can plant individual vegetables or flowers in. And I have two shelves. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, hardening off, a good way to do that is with a cold frame. If you build a cold frame outside where you can have the seedlings get some light yet be protected from the wind a little bit, you can raise the lid up if it gets too hot. But I have 2 shelves, and these are the rope ratchet hangers that I was referring to. And here's my setup here. I've got 2 shelves with the 2 trays on each, with 6-packs inside.
I have a quick question, Phil. I'm just going to interrupt you because somebody wanted to know about the grow lights.
Yes.
Can they just be grown in the house? It looks like, yes, you don't need a greenhouse.
Oh yeah, right. This is yeah, our back sunroom area, and no, you don't need a greenhouse. I mean, basically, as long as you've got these lights here, and you keep them close to the plants. If you don't keep them close to the plants, the plants will get real leggy. They'll start to get long and spindly, and then they'll fall over. But 1 to 2 inches or so above the plant, and then you just raise them up as you go along. But yeah, indoors is fine. That's the way I start my plants, and it works fine. Okay, let's talk a little bit about soil. Soil's the foundation. I mean, if you don't have good soil, you're not going to get optimum results. You can grow things in poor soil, but it doesn't do very well. And the key thing is soil is a living organism, and it is very complex. And the fertility is made up of physical, chemical, and biological aspects. And in the soil, you have this a microbial mass of fungi, protists, bacteria, viruses, and archaea. And as a side note, for those of you that I don't know if you've read Dr. William Wusowitz's book called Fiber Fueled, but if you look at the microbial components of our guts, you will find these exact same elements that are inside our digestive system, and it makes sense to break down the fiber and to provide energy for us. And this is the same process that goes on in our gardens. So within the microorganisms, basically their main role is to decompose organic matter. And they fix some nitrogen, they detoxify chemicals, and they suppress disease organisms. And they stimulate plant growth. So basically these guys do the work of providing the elements that the plants need to grow. And that's an important point. Soil, there's a thing called pH, if you remember back from your chemistry class. And it depends on whether your soil is on the acid side or the basic side. The higher number is alkaline and 7 is neutral, 0 is acid. In that range, as you go down below 7, 6.5 is a good number to shoot for. There are plants that like higher acid, azaleas, blueberries, the whole group here. There are also alkaline loving plants, clematis, forsythia, and so forth. You can test the pH of your soil. For those of us in Pennsylvania, you can take a composite sample, sample like 5 or 6 locations of your garden area, and then combine them in a mix, and then put them in a bag, and you can send them to Penn State through the Agricultural Extension Services, or some of the garden centers will sell sampling kits for Penn State, or there are other commercial ones that you can look for and see to test your pH of your soil. But the soil is made up of various particulates, basically silt, sand, and clay. And an optimum mix would be 40-20-20 of sand, silt, and clay, which is called loam. And to determine what kind of soil you have, you can pick up a handful of damp but not soaking wet soil, rub it between your fingers. If you have clay, it'll feel real slippery and stay tightly balled. If you have sandy, it will feel gritty and crumble. And if you have loam, it'll stay a little bit crumbly, but it stays loosely balled. And loam is the optimum. You can either purchase topsoil or amend it with the soil that you existing with organic materials, like compost or turning in the wheat, grass clippings, and so forth. Compost is black gold. This is really great stuff for the gardener. You can get grass clippings, food scraps, no animal products, vegetarian and animal manure, twigs, cardboard, newspaper, potato peels, anything like that can provide the basis of compost. Try to place the materials in layers, and you try to layer it between green and brown. It can be confusing, but basically use what you have. Green is garden waste like grass clippings, coffee grounds, and manures. Brown is woody materials, leaves, paper, pine needles. So as you start building the bed, try to segregate those materials a little bit. And it's not the end of the world if you can't do that, depending upon what you're generating and how you generate it. But that's the optimum way of doing it. But it is really, the plants just love compost. And it needs to be kept moist. If it dries out too much, because you're relying on the microbes to do their work and break it down. And if it gets too dry, that whole process slows down. and you should turn it periodically. You don't have to do it too often, but once or twice over the time period that you're trying to break it down. These, especially the green materials, will cause the temperature to rise, and you want to keep it below 160 F. 160 F is enough to kill off the weed seeds, but if it gets too hot, then you'll start to break down the microbes, which will slow the process down. So if it gets too hot, you want to turn it a little bit. And a lot of people, you can buy a compost thermometer, which is like about 18 inches long, that you can stick into the pile and see what the temperature is. For the small gardener, vermiculture is a good way to do it. There's a lot of internet videos showing that people get like a tub and drill some holes in the bottom, put some newspapers in there and some garden scraps, vegetable scraps in the kitchen, cardboard, and put some worms in there. And the worm castings are really great fertilizer, and the worms will do a good job in breaking that down and provide good material for your garden plants. So that's a good approach for smaller type situations. Mushroom compost, I've been planting a lot in mushroom compost. I planted all my tomatoes last year in mushroom compost. What I did was I dug a hole with the spade, about the width of the spade, square, and about 6 inches deep, and I filled it with mushroom compost, and I planted my tomatoes directly in them, and they did very well, with the exception that I did have some blossom end rot, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. There were apparently, although there's supposed to be some lime in mushroom compost, which can be a whole variety of things, and it varies depending upon the area that you're getting it from. But it does have some ammonium nitrate and urea and gypsum and a whole variety of different things in it, but it really grows some good plants. Ideally, you would use mushroom compost with some other purchased compost, like cow manure that's been composted, or green waste compost, and mix that up. That's the ideal situation. But I've grown plants directly in the mushroom compost and had good success with them. The urea, the cottonseed meal, and chicken manure provide most of the nutrients to get it going. It's composted at 160 and then pasteurized at 140. And it's spent compost for the mushroom growers, but it's still great for the gardener for growing other plants. Depending upon where you get it, you might have some soluble salts in there that might be too concentrated for germinating seeds. So you probably don't want to use it. You want to use a potting soil to germinate your seeds. And it's one of the things I forgot to mention in the seeding aspect there. In the past, I've been using Miracle Grow to germinate my seeds, and it's worked very well. But now I understand Miracle Grow is connected with Monsanto, and because of their Roundup and everything, I'm going to try to find another provider. But mushroom compost would not be the best source for that. But once the plants get stabilized and they're ready to be transplanted, I grew lots of stuff in mushroom compost last year and didn't have any problem. But the ideal thing to do is, before you put any compost on your garden, is to test it. And what I would recommend would be getting a small container and fill it up with compost and put some green beans seeds in there and see how they do. I know some of the gardeners in Great Britain were having a lot of trouble with compost that they had purchased with commercial companies. due to they were getting grass clippings that had been treated with chemicals and caused a lot of problems. So you want to test it just to make sure before you go through all the effort of growing anything. So it's good to get the material early and give it a test. And if the green beans start to sprout and they come up and they're looking good, then you can go ahead and take care of the rest of the garden. If you're going to start a compost bed, it's best to do it in the fall and let it sit uncovered over the winter, and that would take care if there's any soluble salts in there. The rain and so forth would drain those. If you look at the cost, like for mushroom compost at your landscape places, it's about $37 a cubic yard, which weighs about 2,000 pounds. So you can get a lot for $37. I mean, if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you buy like Miracle Grow organic raised bed soil in bags, to get that equivalent amount, it would cost you $144. So even if you have it trucked in, you're going to be saving money. Like this year, I ordered six cubic yards of mushroom compost, and it cost me like $50 to have it trucked in, but I got a lot of material there to work with. You can make compost bins like these. These are people that were just using slats. Although if I were doing this, a lot of people think that you need to have these slats to get air, and you don't. Basically, I would put cardboard or plywood or something along the walls just to keep the heat in a little bit and keep it dry, or moist rather, keep it from drying out. People like to put in 3 or 4 bins so that the fresh stuff comes in here, and then once it starts to, you turn it, and once it starts to break down, you can move it to the second bin, and then finally to the third bin to finish it. And depending upon how much green material you have in there, if you have more green material, it'll compost faster, but it will also raise the temperature. And so you have to be careful it doesn't get too hot, as I mentioned before. And you can just make a pile. I've done this. This is by my barn. I just created a pile of grass clippings and some sticks and things here that I had cut from some old asparagus plants, and just build it up. But it's better to have a fairly large volume so that you can get that heat and get it going. For fertilizers, you have your options of chemical, which can be petroleum products, and some chemical rocks that are put together in combination. Typically ammonium phosphate, sulfate, and nitrate, urea and ammonium chloride. If you go look at a bag of fertilizer, you're going to see some numbers on there that represent the nitrogen, the potassium, and phosphorus ratio. So if you see a bag that has 10, 20, 20, it would be 10% nitrogen, 20% phosphorus, and 20% potassium. In my garden, I use 5, 10, 10 when I'm using the chemical fertilizers. This is pretty strong. A lot of the farmers will use this for corn. So what are the advantages? It's affordable, it's cheap. You can buy a 40-pound bag, I think for like $15 or something like that. And it does act fast. So the nitrogen gets in there, really stimulates those plant roots. And you know exactly what you're getting because it's listed. They've done the analysis. What are the disadvantages? It's not environmentally friendly. It's a non-sustainable petroleum product. It can leach into water sources, although that's not a problem with the small gardens, but for the farmers, it certainly is. It takes a lot of energy to make it, and it really doesn't improve the structure of the soil. And you may have to repeatedly apply it. And it's easy to over fertilize, and it can kill your plants if you put too much of it on. So it's a delicate balance there. And you can also get toxic buildup, but that could happen in a container maybe, or with the large scale farms, but not so much in a garden. It's not as good as I think as using compost and other organic fertilizers. And it can change the soil pH. And some of them may contain some heavy metals. So the organic fertilizers are usually made from natural substances. They're in their original form, plant, animal waste. Usually they're fish emulsion based, but you can use cow, horse, and chicken manures. Although these have to be rotted or been around for 6 months or longer. You wouldn't want to put these on directly on your plants, because they can burn it, especially the horse manure. Cow manure is not as quite as bad, and chicken manure is very high in nitrogen, and it can cause a problem. Once it's broken down and sat around for a while, or composted, which is the ideal way to use it, then you can go ahead and use it. You can also use cottonseed meal and bone meal and compost, which is the optimum as far as I'm concerned. And there are powdered minerals like rock phosphate, things of that nature, that can help with mineral deficiencies in the soil. But the big advantages of the organic ones, that they do enhance the nutrient profile and the soil structure. And soil structure is key. I don't know if any of you have seen, like on Amazon Prime, they had a movie on there called Intelligent Trees. And it was just fascinating how these trees communicate with each other through the fungal networks that are in the ground and in the soil. And they put radioactive sources in one tree, and they watched how it was distributed through the trees and the other vegetation in the area. It was just really interesting science to see that. But the nutrient profile and soil structure are really key to growing good vegetables. They improves water retention and nutrient retention. The one thing about organic fertilizers like compost is that it doesn't wash away. If you put a lot of nitrogen fertilizer on your crops and you get a heavy rain, you can wash a lot of that out. With compost, those materials are broken down very slowly and spread to the plant over time. So they stay there a lot longer, and they do a much better job. They're very slow release. They don't have any acids or salts. Disadvantages, it's just very slow. They got to keep them moist, and they have to have some heat. What I bought last year, and it worked very well for me, was Neptune Harvest tomato and vegetable concentrate. And this is a foliar spray that I use once a week or every other week, and 1 ounce per gallon. But it's expensive. It's $35 a quart, but it makes 32 gallons, and you can use it over the course of the season. And basically it's ground up fish, seaweed. There's molasses in there, yucca extract, and humic acids. A lot of people try to get humic acids out of compost teas. If you can use compost to make a tea to pour onto your plants, There are two ways to do that. The best way is to take a handful of compost and put it in water, and then get an aquarium pump or something to pump air through there and aerate it. So and then it will oxidize it very, very quickly over a period of time. And if you can also just soak some compost in water, but that goes anaerobic because it just consumes all the oxygen and it gets very smelly, and it's nowhere near as good as oxygenating that. If you want to do that, you can buy humic acids if you wish, but they're contained in this mixture here, and it has a very low NPK ratio, which is 242. So this is more carbon based in terms of the compost breaking down. This will give it a little shot to get stuff going, but in the long term, the compost is supplying the minerals and other elements that the plant needs. So let's talk about tilling and no tilling. I've tilled forever. It breaks up hard soil, and you can get stuff down into the soil, incorporates organic material pretty nicely. It warms up the spring soil, stimulates some of the bacteria, will break up some of the larvae and insects that have been overwintering there. It kills sprouted weeds, but the seeds, it brings them up to the surface, and so you can create weeds. Might cause some erosion if you get heavy rains, and you do lose some moisture once the soil is turned, and you lose some nitrogen. And depending upon, like if you have a rototiller that only goes down to a certain depth, you can create a hard pan because year after year, you're only getting down to that one spot there. And you do have the expense of the equipment. Now you can do it with just a fork. They have these broad forks, which are wide prongs that you can step on and turn. And when I first moved here, that's how I started my garden. But I bought a Troy-Bilt rototiller over 25 years ago and it is just a fantastic machine. It is very well built. The newer Troy-Bilts they're nowhere near as good. So if you were going to buy one, I would buy a used one that's been around for a while. They're just great machines. No-till, it conserves moisture, minimizes time weeding, it provides a healthy soil, improves yields, minimizes erosion, and it requires mulching. So you're putting it on layers of compost on there. And if I were to start a garden now and I had a lawn space or whatever space, I would take and lay cardboard on the ground, or I would build a raised bed out of regular soil and then lay the cardboard down and then put 8 or more inches of compost on top of that. The cardboard will suppress the weeds and it will disintegrate over the season, and the plant roots will go down through there. But this is how I would do it. And Charles Dowding is a market gardener in England, and he has lots of videos on showing you how to do this. And I'll show you a picture of his gardens a little bit later, but he can grow a fantastic amount of vegetables in a very small space. And the advantage of it is you can do succession planting, and you don't have to rotate crops nowhere near as much as you would on a conventional tilled area. So and this is the way that I'm going right now. I built a couple of beds this year, and I'm in a hybrid mode now where I'm doing some tilling and some compost no-till. And but you got to get a good layer on there, and that will suppress the weeds. Um, Watering is important. Timing. I try personally to try early morning or late afternoon. There's been some people say, if you water during the hot sun, it'll burn the plant leaves. I've never had that happen, but it seems to me that if you're watering plants when it's really hot outside, you're going to lose a lot more to evaporation. And so I usually water in the late afternoon, but I try to avoid getting water on the plants, especially in the late afternoon, because if it's humid, you can have problems. So the ideal is to direct the water to the base of the plant, and depending upon where you're at, how much water to use. If your plants are shallow rooted, they may require more frequently watering, like peppers. You don't want to water too much or too little. So it takes a little bit of experience, and you'll get a feel for it. I mean, if you look at the plants and they look yellow, a little bit peaked, they're drooping, you need some water on them. You can also put your finger down into the soil, and if it feels moist, you've got enough. You also it's a good idea to increase it during when the fruits are bearing on the plants. And drip irrigation is a good way to do it. I installed a drip irrigation system last year, and it paid benefits for me. There's a couple different ways to do it. There's drip emitters, which are little devices about the size of a dime that have a membrane in there that controls the pressure. So it's pressure compensated along the whole length of the tubing. So you don't have a lot of water coming out closest to the water source, and the guys at the end of the line are not getting any. There are soaker hoses, and these can be simple hoses with just holes in them, or they have drip tapes, which have little plastic elements in them that have a designated hole size in there that will drip, and that will spread the pressure out along the hose a little bit better. They're not as good as a drip emitter. You can buy them in a tape type thing, which is like a 5/8 inch diameter tape, or tubing. And then there's the standard sprinklers, where you can use that to water the area, which is a little bit harder in getting control. I purchased the Netafim Woodpecker Juniors for my emitters. They were used by a lot of the grape growers. Here's an example of an emitter. When you install the emitter, you want to have it in the upward direction, so that if there's any dirt or any particulate in the water stream, even though you may have I filter the water before it goes out. You can get these in very low flow rates. I have them. The ones that I bought were the smallest ones, 1/2 gallon per hour. This is an example of a soaker hose, or drip tape will come out. And then this is a soaker hose here, but the drip tapes will have these spaced either 6 inches or 12 inches or 18 inches apart, depending upon the types of plants that you're using. I use the drip tapes more for my lettuce and leafy crops. These I use for my tomatoes and peppers and beets and some of the other crops like that. Weeds are the bane of all gardeners. Probably the most time-consuming activity, and they grow fast when it gets hot. How do you control them? Well, you can hoe them, and I've done that a lot. Just chop them out and bury them. Mulching is a good way to control them. You can lay down plastic or cardboard or grass clippings or wood chips. And I've used landscape cloth and newspaper to control. This is one big advantage of no-till, is that when you use the compost and you put that weed barrier down, you'll get a few weeds that are blown in, and you might get some perennial weeds that will work their way through, but you can cut them out. But it cuts your weeding time down to much less than if you do it with a regular tillage method. and it conserves, mulches help conserve water. There is one weed that's, well, there's a couple that are actually edible. This is purslane, and I have a ton of this in my garden. Come July, it grows like crazy, but it has some good aspects to it, and vitamins and minerals. And I put it on my salads. The other one that I will eat is dandelion greens. That's an acquired taste because they're somewhat bitter. But this is what purslane looks like in the garden. And I'm sure you've all seen it in your garden. Some of the perennial weeds are really tough. If you look at dandelions, this is a profile that was, I got this from a German website. But the weeds can go down 10 to 15 feet. Now, if you're going to eat the dandelion leaves, you certainly can get a lot of good minerals and so forth because it's down there picking up everything. You want to compare that to like a garlic plant where it might only get down 1.3 feet. So for these weeds, you've got to dig down a little bit and cut them with a spade or whatever, and then you got to have to do that repeatedly to get them to the point where they weaken down and then they give it up. So we have pest control. And there's a whole series of things. I've had trouble with flea beetles. They are terrible for me. That's why I plant my potatoes very early. I found that if I plant my potatoes later, the flea beetles will just decimate them. They'll make the leaves look like Swiss cheese. But if I plant them earlier before they hatch, then my plants are much stronger. The leaves are thicker and they're more robust. I always plant excess because I never know how much damage I'm going to have from these guys. You can also prevent them by encouraging winds like these parasitic wasps and the whole gang of them here, and companion planting. There's a variety of flowers that you can plant. I know my basil, when I'm out there picking basil, the bees are just all over everything out there, and they all attract a lot of beneficial insects. You can spray them with neem oil, hot pepper, garlic, pyrethrum, soapy water, and there's some biologic controls like these parasitic wasps, what you can buy and release them there. You can use row covers, and this is what I'm going to do for my eggplant this year. To keep the flea beetles off of them because they're a warm season crop. So you can time your planting, like I said, with the potatoes. You can use rotenone. I've used rotenone in the past, but I found out that it is a neurotoxicant. Some people have been having Parkinson-like symptoms from it, so I quit using it. But even though this is classified as organic, you have to be careful and understand the toxicology associated with what you're using. Critters, these guys are a problem. Wire fencing works to a degree. What I found is that I took 2-foot high chicken wire and I have a wire strand on the bottom and one at the top of that 2-foot, and I tied it to a fence charger to electrify it. There's a use for keeping cattle and horses and so forth in. And that will keep the groundhogs and the raccoons and some of the other guys out. Deer are a real challenge. I have a wire that's 4-foot high that's electrified. And when the deer get shocked on it, they put their nose on it, they get shocked and they learn not to do that. But every once in a while you'll get a knucklehead that'll jump over the fence. But it can be a problem early in the season when the plants are more vulnerable because they're more tender and the deer will eat them right up. Or you can use netting to keep birds off. And you can set traps to catch some of these guys. I've done all of this. As an example, the row cover. This is a lighter row cover that can be used right directly over the crop. I guess these are carrots here, and it will let the light and the water through if it rains, but it will keep the insects to a minimum on the crops. Garden orientation, you want it south facing for the full sun. uh, make sure you plant the tall plants so they don't shade the small one. Like if you're going to plant sweet corn, you don't want it to be getting hit with the sun first, and it will shade your other crops. There is a little app called suncalc.net where you can put your location in, and it will show you the path of the sun. And usually it's good to have your garden in a manner that you'll catch the sun from morning to afternoon, so you get everything in full sun. Tomatoes and pepperheads, like I had sun rot last year, and that apparently did not have a lot of lime in it, and it's a calcium issue, and there's not enough in the soil, pH, or irregular watering. I know my situation wasn't due to that because I have my watering system on a timer, and it would go on for 20 minutes and then shut off. So I knew I had to go to regular watering, but what you have to do is get some calcium on the plants. And what I did was bought some calcium chloride foliar spray, and I sprayed it on there, and that stopped it. But this year I'm going to make sure that I bought some CalMag, which is a solution of calcium and magnesium that I'm going to amend the mushroom compost with before I plant my tomatoes to try to minimize that. If you get too much watering you're not good on your watering frequency, your tomatoes can crack because of irregular watering. This is what blossom end rot looks like on the end of the tomatoes. These are some of my tomatoes from last year. This is the picnic table I have out here, and I grew a whole variety of them, mostly San Marzano's for making spaghetti sauce, and these are green zebras, which are kind of a tart tomato, which are good, and mortgage lifters, and a whole variety. And I filled this up many times last year. I had a lot of tomatoes. Tomato types, there's determinate and indeterminate, but the determinates will grow to a specified height. So you need to look, you may have to go online. You won't find this sometimes on the seed package, but you don't really need to prune these too much. And there's a lot of videos on pruning tomatoes online. If you want to get into that, I don't have time to do that now. And then there's the indeterminate, which will just keep growing and growing and growing. And like the San Marzano's will do that. And so you have to watch, and you do have to prune these a little bit to keep them under control. And if the tops get too high, they'll just break over. So you need to prune them if they outgrow your supports. You want to keep the vines off the ground. Staking is the traditional way of doing that. Whatever you tie them with, you want to make sure it's good and wide so you don't compromise the main vine. If you have a piece of wire or something like that, it can cut into it. You can use cages, which is the way that I've gone. A concrete reinforcing wire, bend it into a cage. It will last for many years, and I've had good success with it. Or you can trellis them, and this is what most of the market growers do. Here's an example of a trellis here, and these are the cages. This is just a string coming down with a stake in the ground, and then you just train the tomato right up the vine. And in the cage, I have mine probably about 24-inch in diameter, and I space them about 3 feet apart, and they work well. What I am going for the future, like I said, I'm moving from till to no-till, more organic fertilizers, building large compost bins. I'm going to build 4 of them, 4 chambers. And Charles Dowding and Richard Perkins are good sources. Dowding is a really good British gardener. You can go on the internet and find his videos. Elaine Ingram's a good soil scientist. She talks a lot about the microbiome. This is a bed that I put in the fall that I planted 230 garlic bulbs in, and they're about 6 inches right now. But I laid the bark cardboard down and put about 5 inches of compost here, and I ran out, and so I dug a trench on the end here and filled it with compost, and planted all my bulbs. This is a example of Charles Dowding's garden, and he can plant very densely and get some beautiful crops. And he uses row covers occasionally too. And this is all grown on compost on top of cardboard. So, questions and comments?
I tell you what, Phil, you cannot believe the questions that I and the pleading to get you more into details. Wow. So here's what I publicly told everyone, because a number of people had to leave. So I told everybody that I was going to email the questions that are in the chat room or that they emailed me. I'm going to email their questions to you so that you can answer them back to me, and I'll put all of your answers in my follow-up email. What do you think about that?
That would be fine, Sally, although you won't be able to send them out tomorrow because I have something scheduled. So it may take me a day or two before we can get that done. And then you can send it out with the recording.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I mean, nothing major, but yeah, I got a couple private messages that they had to leave. And so, so I said, don't worry, I'll get you.
I'll stay as long as anybody wants. If they want to go ahead, and if you want to go through some of them now, it's up to you.
Okay. Well, the thing about, does soil that has been from previous years, does it go bad? Does the I see I have to remember now to put down the answers.
Well, that's all right, Sally. I mean, just email them to me, Sally.
Let me just give that, because it'll make it easier for me. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's all
somebody had asked a question earlier that you had emailed me about. I think I answered it on the raised bed section, but they had an issue with cicadas, and there is nothing that I can think of that will work to stop cicadas. I initially thought, well, maybe the row covering might, but I remembered I had read a book called Pioneer Women about these early women that were living in Kansas when they had these great locust attacks, and they ate everything. I mean, they ate cloth, clothing. They went through sacks. I mean, so there's no answer that I can give to prevent that. I mean, they are really, really difficult. The grasshoppers and locusts can chew up quite a bit. So I have no answer for that.
Okay. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Does the type of compost or fertilizer affect the taste of tomatoes? Did you ever see a difference?
That's hard to say. I really didn't notice a significant difference. I mean, the biggest difference I saw was between store-bought tomatoes and homegrown. But as far as going from compost planting to regular nitrogen-based fertilizer, I really didn't see a difference.
Well, Phil, we thank you immensely. Again, it was even more informative than last year. If you could surpass it, you did. And for those of you that are still on, it was there. You're getting. I'll send it to you. But a lot of people are saying thank you to you, Phil. And yeah, and we'll get back the recording. You'll get sent the recording, and you'll get sent. I'll send Phil the questions, and you'll get a reply back in a couple of days. How's that?
Well, thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed it, and
yes,
happy gardening.
It was great.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Okay,
yes.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
So,
Thank you.
Is Brittany still there, Sally, or?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, when I save that to the cloud, do you know where that's going to end up? Because I've never done that before.
I'm not 100% sure. It might have even went to Sally's account. So she might have to dig around. This is the first time we've used Plant-Based Pittsburgh Zoom account, so it's a little bit different.
Okay,
Whenever you close it out, if it comes, it might pop up into a folder. If that happens, you can just email it to me if it does that. If not, we may have to search
all right,
for
I'm
it.
going to stop the recording now and just see what happens. It said, do you